What I wanted to talk about was, custom hooks. I guess, you guys already know about custom hooks and, you guys have created it many times before this. So I'm gonna talk about much more complicated custom hooks, but I did not go into that detail into this article, but I was just covering, some of the majority basics, I believe, are important when you're designing the custom hooks. Okay. Custom hooks are used like use image loader, use input text, use image fade, small level stuff. But when you work on bigger level projects, you try to create custom hooks to simplify the functionality of your repository at times. And these custom hooks are not as simple as this. They try to do state management on an authentication level. I guess that's when you go for the custom hooks. But the thing here is, most of the times when we design the custom hooks, we don't really think about what is going to happen in the future. We think about what needs to be solved at this particular instance, at this particular moment, and we just go ahead and do the functionality, abstract the functionality, and go ahead and do it. But the problem with this particular measurement is it is okay in the small level stuff. But like, for example, I'm working with a new client and his repository is really messed up. Okay. But they have, like, you guys know Redux, right? They have like 50 to 60 different slices in Redux. That's how complicated that project is. Usually, when they just got started, they would not have expected that the project might have 50 to 60 slices. But as it progresses, and as we build on feature after feature after feature, it gets so jailed that you will not be able to manage or understand. Anyone will not be able to understand what is happening at where. You do something at some place, something else will happen at some place, with the bugs and all. So that's why you wanna think what happens in the future. So that's the main thing here, like plan for the future, so that whenever you're designing an abstraction, do not think about what is going to happen at this moment. Think about what is going to happen next month and what is going to happen in next year, and think about what kind of complex functionalities can be actually happening or taking place in that particular hook. And I'll go into an examples. So these are like the five things. I was following the solid principle style. So the first thing is single source of truth. So this is the motto behind the Redux. Like if you open the Redux homepage and try to read their entire thing, their entire thing is based on this single source of truth. This basically means that any data, any state should have a singular source of truth. Like no matter how complex it is, it should always exist in that particular state. It has to be the only hook of its kind for that particular functionality. So let's just say there is use auth. Okay. The data source of it should be singular. Like most of the times I observe that many of you guys, and even me, when I just start using the Redux, this use app selector, right? So in the components, you directly fetch it, the user object or whatever, you fetch it directly in the component. That you should not do. What you should do is, instead of fetching it directly like this, use app selector, you should use the hook that you have created, and return it in the hook and pitch it using the hook. Why this is the case is because in some point in the future, maybe the user's output will be defined on the basis of some other condition. So let me show you an example like this. Like if mode is incognito, use user 2. If mode is not incognito, use user 1, right? So this is a definition that I can, in the future, I can just add this functionality in the hook level, and none of the code will be, will not damage. But let's just say we have tried to use the user thing directly, then what will happen is, then you'll again have to change in every place you have done the use app selector. You'll have to add this functionality mode equals to incognito everywhere. So that is not how you want to design it. Like the source of it should always be in that hook. And let's just say any modifications that you want to do in the future, that will happen inside the hook. And let's just say this logout user is a functionality and we are using the logout thing. Internally also we can define this because it's a simple functionality, right? Local storage dot remove item and firebase dot get auth dot sign out. So in the inside the component, I can just go ahead and just copy paste these lines. But do not do that. What you have to do is you have to export it, the logout user, in the hook itself, and then use it somewhere. Because what happens is in the future, we can add dependency functionality. Like you want to do analytics whenever someone logs out. Okay. So what this will do, we can just create that thing log analytics internally in the function, and that is all. You don't have to change anything elsewhere. But if you just copy pasted these two lines, in the component directly, then what you would have to do is you will have to again do this functionality in every component that you have done. So the entire point of it is try to think what will happen in the future. And that's how you can design the code, better and better. And the second thing is immutable, extensible outputs and logics. It might sound crazy, but it's pretty simple. Okay, in simpler words, never change the output of a hook, and if there is a need for change, add the change as a new output. So that is all it means. So first thing is never change the output of the hook. That means it is immutable. Immutable means it cannot mutate. It will always remain the same. So let's just say you are exporting a leaderboard. There is a use game leaderboard hook, and you are exporting a leaderboard. Then do not change it to leaderboard 2 or leaderboard 3 or like company leaderboard or anything. Leaderboard, even if you use it or do not use it, should still remain leaderboard. But you want to add in some other functionality like user country based leaderboard, then do not change the leaderboard. Just add it as a new parameter, returning parameter, user control leaderboard. And then if there is another functionality called user language leaderboard, then again add it as a third functionality. So you're extending the outputs. You're not mutating the original output, you're letting it remain the same, and you're extending the outputs. Third thing is readable and simplified inputs. This is the major confusion. I think Vishwajit tried to do the hooks, but anyway, so I'll go into it. Essentially, do not pass in mutable states as inputs to hook. This auth URL set you auth URL. This means that some place else elsewhere you are mutating it, and you are expecting the user data to change on the basis of this mutation. Whenever such a case happens, like auth set URL, define it internally inside the hook. You know, inside the hook, you can define auth URL, set auth URL, use state, whatever, and then export it, set auth URL, and you do this. So this way, what happens is the set auth URL is internal to the hook. The problem
Yeah.
with passing the mutable states as inputs is it do not internally. What you will have to do is whenever set auth URL is being changed, internally you'll again have to do a use effect of the input. Use effect, you'll have to pass in a dependency of the input auth URL, and again internally you'll have to check prepare a duplicate state of that auth URL so that you transaction between this and that. So this is complexity, too much complexity. So instead of that, you can just pass in create the state internally to the hook and just pass in the set auth URL. The second thing is optional inputs and requisite inputs. Sometimes you want to define requisite inputs like URL is to string. So whenever you're trying to design your hooks, make sure that whatever you're passing in the first parameter is actually a requisite. Because if you pass in the first parameter like an optional input, and then at some point in the future, like 2 to 3 months from now, you wanted to pass in a requisite input, then what happens is you cannot pass it in the third term. What happens is if you pass it in the third term, it will cause TypeScript errors, so you can't do that.
Mm.
And so you'll have to pass it in the first term. And when you have to pass it in the first term, first input parameter, then you will have to again change it in all the places this hook has been used, right? So this is why whenever you are seeing a pattern where something will happen in the chain, put it in the first term. The better option is do not even pass the inputs as this, like pass the inputs as objects. So if you see these objects, these are like direct inputs and these are object-based inputs. So what happens with the object-based inputs is you can arrange them in any order. It doesn't really matter because they are mapped by the field key. It doesn't
Mm.
really matter if you pass the car, truck, or bike. It has to be in the same order if you pass the inputs like this. But if it is an object like this, you can pass in any different way. So the fourth point is bifurcate your hooks. So this is actually a simple thing, and you might be thinking that it is actually negating what we just first talked about, that the singularity of the hooks, right? But bifurcation actually refers to whenever the complexity of a particular hook is becoming too large, then you bifurcate on the basis of different functionalities. Okay, it's not the meaning that it still will remain singular. However many times you bifurcate, whatever is divided, it is still particulate to a particular narrowed down functionality. Okay, so I'll give the best example, that is the WAGMI reactivity for Ethereum apps. So this is a public library, by the way, and this is, if they actually do a singular hook functionality, then in that particular functionality there will be 58 complex functions, each
Yeah.
managing to trying to do different kinds of stuff. But bifurcate, like first they bifurcated using three simple hooks. As the project builds up in the future, many projects that you work on, right, when it starts off as a scratch, usually the functionality is very simple, so one hook is enough. But as you go on adding new features and new features, it's better to always fragment your hooks. you know like use connect can become use block, use chain id, use config, use account, use balance. And right now this library has about 58 hooks, and everything is really clear. Each hook handles a particular functionality, and that is all. And it doesn't really mess with all the other functionalities. Thing is, avoid hooks when not in need. So this is another thing that I observed. Basically, we have the habit of creating hooks whenever we want to abstract any functionality. It is not really needed. Like JavaScript functions, if you know how to use JavaScript functions, like TypeScript functions or JavaScript functions, there are there are so many magical things that you can do with functions. Like there are higher order functions, and there are functions, internal functions. You can pass in callbacks as a parameter input into the function. So there is many things that you can actually do with just functions only. So try not to use hooks as much as possible, because hooks are related to the state of the website.
Yeah.
So whenever a hook is being called, it means that it is doing some state level changes. It also means that whenever that particular state changes, that particular part of the web component is actually refreshing, is actually re-rendering. So sometimes you do not really need hooks. Like let's just say you're clicking save button of a particular document. At that point, there is no point of having any hook unless you want to do loading animations or something like that. There is really no need. Whenever there is an data thing, like we go with something like this, fetch coin data, fetch coin historical data. All of this is basically compiled into a promise, and people can use it in however many different ways they want to use it. The reason this is better than the other thing is this doesn't really affect the state cycle. As long as it is not affecting the state cycle, it is more and much better performant. If there is a need for the state cycling management, then obviously that is why we are passing it or returning it as a promise, so that we can do whatever state functionality is needed inside the UI component itself. And sometimes it is
Mm.
actually more simpler to actually keep the const set is loading or something inside the component itself. If it is a small thing,
Yeah.
right? No need to create Redux states for that. I guess that is it. I'll let Kshitiz take over.